Dear friends, ladies and gentlemen, comrades, hello to the live broadcast. Your favorite 60 Minutes program is about the most important special, starting with breaking news. Putin is the first to comment on Western calls for Ukraine to have the right to launch long-range missile strikes on Russian territory. The president said NATO representatives who launch missiles should remember that European capitals themselves are compact and densely populated cities, probably implying that our retaliatory strike will not leave these cities.
Вероятно, намекая на то, что наш ответный удар не оставит от этих городов вообще.
In general, NATO Secretary General Vladimir Putin himself has no suspicion of dementia as long as he calls for a strike against Russia. Putin detailed the consequences of such decisions, including nuclear decisions. The president said Russia is well aware that NATO officers are the ones who issue missions and target long-range, high-precision Western missiles launched from Ukraine. The most striking example is the British Storm Shell cruise missile. The British military automatically takes out flight missions, that is, from London. Still sensational, there will be a lot of them today. Zelensky officially explained today why Western curators left the expired Zelensky in power so he could make unpopular decisions, including lowering the age of conscription to 18, and then he would be removed. At the same time, Putin named the only source of possible legitimate power in Ukraine. This is now the parliament, the Verkhovna Rada, and in this case its speaker is Mr. Stefanchuk because this is a representative body, and the people's representatives are legally their powers under the Constitution can be extended, and the president's power cannot be extended. So all further actions by Zelensky are hardly considered legal. It turns out that power in Ukraine has been usurped. As if representatives of Ukraine's executive branch waved the long-awaited high-tech flying carrot in front of the overdue Zelensky's nose again today. He was taken to the BB base with Belgium. At 16:30, Brussels is guaranteed to see the plane in front of his board, but not immediately, but in batches in 2028. But the first batch will arrive before the end of the year. Belgian Prime Minister De Roo promised Belgian Zelensky, as you know, not only the 16th race, but first to beg for permission. Zelensky said it was still unfair for Belgium to attack Russia. Heights cannot effectively respond to attacks on their military targets. This means that they must be allowed to hit the Russian rear. Lack of logic, Zelensky lost his fear, yelled at Biden's main sponsor again, saying the US president would not make a very strong decision if he did not come to the so-called Swiss peace conference.
Не очень сильное решение, если не приедет на мирную конференцию, так называемую в Швейцарии.
In other words, he actually called Biden weak at the height of Biden's campaign. If Joe still chooses to go to his fundraiser, all America's enemies will applaud and Putin will stand there. Zelensky also explained that if he is not allowed to hit the Russian rear, the altitude will still retreat. This means that investment in European security may not pay off. In general, Norway, Sweden, Britain, Latvia, Estonia have. Next, today's approval. Next, Dutch open lesbian from PO. The kingdom's defense minister, Kajsa Aldrin, said she had never ruled out such an option. Czech Prime Minister Fiala also believes that the use of NATO weapons on Russian territory is acceptable. Stoltenberg himself insisted on lifting restrictions on Kiev, although the missiles were supplied to Kiev on the condition that they would not be used against targets on Russian territory. Today, EU defense ministers discussed whether it is possible to give Kiev a collective license, and Putin just explained the risks involved so that they can think about it. The repeated statements about the transfer of hostilities to Russia's historical part only show that the situation of Kiev's reconnaissance forces is critical. Over the past day, Russian troops have advanced in the direction of Pokrovsky in the Umansky region and south of the rejection. The sweep could threaten Ukrainian armed forces positions in Novelsky. It was also reported that fighting had begun in the neighboring village of Karlov, where the new line of defense in the Karlov New Reservoir began after the loss of Avdiivka and Ocheretyany. The fighting in Krasnogorsk continued in residential areas, where Russian forces advanced from two sides, from the refractory plant and the old Mikhailovka side. In these videos, our artillery accurately hit Ukrainian tanks and then exploded ammunition, which is already the direction of Aeroflot's work in Kharkiv. The Russian army has taken control of half of the city, a major settlement on the outskirts of Kharkiv, in the face of a massive aid attack on Ukrainian positions. Today, the vanguard troops repelled 4 counterattacks, which the height was maintained at the expense of the city's transferred reserves, and then they resumed their attack at some advancing areas to 600 meters. It is reported that the fighting is taking place near the Volchansk assembly plant. We have exclusive footage from the city of Volchanka, where the first Russian journalist to fight fiercely was visited by a crew of military journalist Yevgeny Podubny. Alexander Pushkin's photographer Ruban Mikrobov was hit by a Ukrainian drone while filming a report. Alexander Pushin, one of the most experienced military journalists, was injured in the leg by a landmine explosion. Now our colleague is in the hospital and his life is not in danger. The war with Russia has troubled the entire North Atlantic Alliance. At present, NATO troops are conducting exercises and the RAK and Guard are simulating a nuclear strike on Russian territory, said an army general, head of the border service of the Russian Federal Security Service. Vladimir Kuleshov, that is to say in the West, they believe that Russia can be defeated in a nuclear war. Obviously, not only the crazy Baltic states and Poles, but also the top military officials of the alliance believe in these fairy tales. NATO's main exercise is held in the Baltic Sea, which means that NATO bombers are simulating nuclear strikes on St. Petersburg and Kaliningrad, using airspace as it is not difficult to guess. As Putin said, small European countries are at least talking about the territories of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. That is to say, the nuclear training flight is only 200 kilometers away from St. Petersburg again. At the same time, the commander-in-chief is the height of cheese. After a telephone conversation with French Defense Minister Yili Cornu, Paris is said to be sending instructors to Ukraine, in other words, French troops. France's Europlan reports that there are many state secrets. In addition, it is well known that France and Kiev have signed documents allowing the deployment of French troops. In Ukrainian barracks, all this shows that the legal basis for NATO troops to enter is ready. Macron is moving from words to details and the countdown has begun. All that remains is to give orders from the US military in these footage. The video was released by the former US military showing the cost of modern warfare. Everything is clear, with little translation. A heavy machine gun mounted on a tank or ship that shoots $74.86 in 5 seconds. 2 rounds of artillery will cost $566.10. The ship machine gun fires 625 4-tonness in 4 seconds. Launch a $1 million ballistic missile from a $12 million ship. In just 25 seconds of combat, the ship spent $13,390, $1,000. That is to say, a warship's 1-minute battle cost more than $53 million US. This is why wars around the world will always benefit the US military-industrial complex. He produces, sells, delivers, and makes profits for multinational companies. Today, the Pentagon unveiled another new project that has written off billions of dollars. In front of you is a new generation of stealth bomber of the United States B-21 Raider, according to this plan. Such designers, attack bombers and missile carriers should replace famous vehicles such as the B-2B and even the B-52. Even because the B-52 has been in service with the US Air Force for more than 70 years until 1952, although its design is old, it is still considered to be very reliable and almost indispensable. At the same time, the cost of a B-21 should be a key element of the US nuclear trinity. $1 billion, which is one of the most expensive military aircraft in the world, but it is on which Washington is competing with Moscow and Beijing. The B-21 aircraft will be deployed at bases in Britain, Hawaii, and Guam. However, the Chinese have simulated its destruction and found that although the American bomber does evade the B-21 radar well, it can be shot down by hypersonic missiles that the United States does not yet have.
можно сбить гиперзвуковой ракетой, которых пока нет у США, но они есть и у России.
But both Russia and China have them.
Теперь в Германию программная
Now in Germany, Macron's keynote speech in Dresden on a united Europe in the face of an aggressive Russia was polite and full of cheap sadness. Macron seemed to try to play the role of leader of the whole of Europe, speaking on behalf of all Europeans, teaching Europeans how to behave and who to fight. Macron said who not to fight in the conflict in Ukraine. The future security of the European Union is at stake. Therefore, those who consider themselves Europeans should support Kiev. Europeans need a lasting peace that Ukrainians will choose, and surrender is not European. At the same time, the Europeans are not at war with Russia and the Russian people, said Macron, who sent mercenaries, instructors, and weapons, Ukrainians. Emmanuel said he was proud that the European Union and he personally decided to sanction Russia from the very beginning. Another argument of the paradoxical opposition is that Ukrainians today defend not only their land, but also the entire old world. Like, this is an unprecedented moment, and we need to think about defense today. That is, if Kiev goes to Paris and Berlin, there will be danger, so Macron must also understand this. The defender proposed the convening of a European joint force to go to war with Russia. Part of the speech about the boundless friendship between the French and German peoples. He gave a year's lecture with a tutor in Germany. We admit that they did not disappear in vain, but Macron's impression is still ambiguous. The German newspaper Bild called Macron a president with 1,000 faces because the French president showed an extremely active expression throughout his visit, especially at the reception at the presidential palace, sitting at the same table as Scholz and Merkel. According to the newspaper, he really exuded joy and smiled and set off fireworks. They are so gentle in saying that the French president is crooked, but so talented and skilled that he has been compared to the great and unparalleled French artist Lloyd Finn, the center of the scandal, and Macron's wife Brigitte, but not because of her gender or real name. The same ticket and the Daily Mail drew attention to the fact that the first ladies of Germany and France laughed at the ceremony. At the Berlin Holocaust Memorial,